good evening to everyone, wherever you are tuning in from, and welcome to Eval Café. My name is John Akwete. I am the coordinator for Eval Café here at the Evaluation Center at Western Michigan University, and I'll be your host for today. Though we are tuning in virtually, we would like to recognize that Western Michigan University is located on land historically occupied by Ijawa, Odawa, and Boduwami nations. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor this ancestral land of the Three Fire Confederacy and consider the sacred land of all indigenous people and their continued presence, especially wherever you may be tuning in from. The Evaluation Café is a weekly series presented throughout the academic year that featured guest speakers on a wide range of evaluation topics, as evident in all our presentation last semester, and has been taking place at the Evaluation Center since the early 1980s. Though these have traditionally been a small in-person gathering that has been recorded and shared online continuously from last semester, this spring 2022 speaker series, while some may be hybrid, all events will be open to the public to join online regardless of location. For our 8th event this semester, we are delighted to be joined by two distinguished guests, Chari Smith and Zach Tintel. So Zach will be the guest facilitator for today. So Zach, you are ready to take on. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I'm so excited to be guest facilitating this interview with Chari Smith. Today we're talking about building evaluation cultures. Myself, I am a current PhD candidate in the interdisciplinary PhD in evaluation program. I am also a research associate at the Evaluation Center, and I'm an evaluation consultant that works with external organizations. Thrilled to have Chari join us, and I will want to say, before we turn the time over, feel free to jump in the chat with questions as we're going. This is intended to be a really fluid, organic conversation. We have some questions queued up, but we'd love to have y'all be involved in this and make it participatory and get your initial impulses and insights and questions here woven into the conversation. So with that, I'll invite Chari to introduce yourself, and if you could, tell us what inspired you to write this book and who is it for?
Sure. So I'm Chari Smith. I founded Evaluation into Action, located in Portland, Oregon. And I also wrote the book, Nonprofit Program Evaluation Made Simple. So I'm really excited to be here today. What inspired me to write this book was just seeing a lot of nonprofits professionals overwhelmed with how to do program evaluation, feeling like they weren't equipped, or that they were very funder driven to do the evaluation work, and just a lot of confusion on how to do it. So this book really was born from wanting to help and give people a training tool, if you will, to really help them understand how to get started with the process. The second piece, though, about who it's for, so nonprofit professionals, but also for early career evaluators, students of evaluation, even seasoned evaluators who want to look at another approach or a way to look at nonprofit program evaluation. And just a little bit of insight. I haven't told this story before, but early in my consulting career, back in 2005, I worked with an organization, and I got really pushed hard in this experience because I wasn't yet understanding how to build a culture of evaluation and why it was important. So in this situation, I shared the report with them, and it wasn't done collaboratively at all. It was done how I did it in my previous job, which was I was paid to do a plan, to collect the data and do a report. That was what I did. And with very little input from them. And when I shared the results with them, and a lot of the results showed a lot of challenges in different areas, instead of what I was expecting of like, let's have a conversation on how we can learn and improve. That didn't happen. They got very defensive and poked lots of holes in my methodology. And I was so sad. I was so crumbled. It wasn't just pushed back. I was pushed down. And I went to some of my evaluation colleagues just heartbroken, and they all shared similar experiences. And it was an aha moment for me of the importance of building a culture of evaluation. And I really reflected in my own practice of like, what do I need to do differently so that never happens again? And the key became really looking at doing this collaboratively. And that is a key to building a culture of evaluation.
I love it. That's such an amazing origin story for you here and for the book, and it's really visceral because many of us who've kind of experienced that pushback from that kind of pitfall of working in that style and mode. And so I'm looking forward to getting into that more fully. But before we continue on, can you just tell us what we mean when we say culture of evaluation or evaluation organizational culture? What do we mean when we say that?
Right. So I appreciate that. So Beth Cantor and Eliza Sherman have this great book, The Happy, Healthy Nonprofit. And in it, they define what organization or culture means. And they talk about it being a complex tapestry of values, attitudes, beliefs, and artifacts. And when I first read that, I was just what jumped out to me of like, that's really speaks to me in terms of evaluation. Like it is a complex tapestry, right? You've got all these people with different opinions, different backgrounds, different experiences. But if they don't value doing evaluation work and they don't believe it'll help them and their job in some capacity. So if their belief system is around, we're doing this because the funders are telling us we have to. I'm only gathering these data because it's mandated to do so. It's like on a checklist. It's not at all integrated into the concept of wanting to learn and understand, are we making the difference we think we're making or we hope we're making, right? So really, I think that in terms of defining what an evaluation culture is, it's this idea of that the values, the attitudes, the beliefs, that complex tapestry that makes up an organizational culture, are they reflective of being a learning culture?
Thank you for that definition. That really kind of provides us with a picture of what we mean when we say this. I can think of examples of when I feel like maybe I've observed or I've been in organizations that have kind of gone from the spectrum of that compliance to learning. But given that we're oriented, we're looking, we're interested in focusing on building these evaluation cultures or how we can build this. Can you speak more to like what are the benefits of evaluation organizational cultures and maybe who benefits in what ways if we can drill down into what this looks like and what this means for these values and
Absolutely.
tapestry?
Yeah, you bet. So I think what it means is that you're a learning organization. So instead of the funder in the driver's seat of what data you're going to collect, the nonprofit is in the driver's seat. And it really benefits them because then it takes the guesswork of how to do what to do for program implementation, right? I'm often brought into an organization because their funder is requiring data, right? I don't necessarily say out of the gates, I'm going to change your entire culture, so be ready. Right. But I look for that like willingness to learn because oftentimes they don't even realize that is an option of that's what program evaluation is truly at its core all about. So I want to give you an example. I'm just going to get out the book here because it helps me to not try and memorize. So I worked with Portland Homeless Family Solutions back in 2013. And when I first met with them, their goal was to get families housed, right? And they also were reporting out the number of families they served and the average length of stay. That's it. That's all they were reporting out. When I got into, so I do three things when I work with an organization. I do a document analysis. I do a survey with all of the people that touch the data in any way. And then you do an evaluation planning session live, like virtually or in person, to get everybody literally on the same page, right? So I really want to understand how they feel about that. So I'm looking to see if the written parts and the spoken parts, what people are saying and writing about the program are in alignment. So when I did that for the Portland Homeless Family Solutions, what was written down was very compelling in terms of the need to end family hope, to really offer services to help people get housed, right? When I talked to staff, they talked a lot about the range of services they offered, which I didn't see anywhere a connection between those, right? Of then if you're only reporting on those two numbers, how is anybody going to understand, one, what you're doing and the impact you're making? And two, how are you learning if you're in fact being the most efficient in your program implementation. So right, you have the process and the outcome evaluation pieces, which I address both when I work with an organization. So the housing scale that I created for them came from working with the whole staff and looking at how their caseworkers all kept their notes a little bit differently, which is no surprise, right? They all, some of them had handwritten notes, some of them had electronic notes, but they didn't have a standardized way to understand where each family was on actually getting housed. So you asked about benefits, so I'm getting there,
Yeah.
right? So in developing a housing scale, what that meant is that every time there was a meeting, whether it was weekly or daily or whatever, that case manager needed to jot down where this family was on getting housed. And I'm just going to read the scale to you. It's on page 135 here of what's their housing status. Have they not started? Have they applied for housing? Have they secured it but not moved in? Have they housed? Are they disengaged? And they would find a small percentage of people over time disengaged. They just disappeared, left the shelter and they didn't know why. By doing this regularly, and as a staff looking at the data regularly, before even meeting with those families, they could say things like, hey, notice that this family, they've been applying for housing for the last 6 weeks. Why aren't they moving? What do they need? Because they offer a ton of services, right? They offer life skills classes, job support, all of those different pieces. Like, what do they need to get support? So the benefit to them is it took the guesswork. One, they could really look at families who were maybe at risk of disengaging before they disengaged. They had a concrete way to use data to understand, like, wow, someone is stuck in this spot for a long time. How do we move them? So it did a couple of things. It benefited them to really streamline their own internal processes and how they work with the families they're trying to get housed. And it put a lot more context in between, like, we want to get families housed and we're reporting out these 2 numbers. And that really expanded to reporting out because we developed outcomes, right? So we expanded out to outputs and outcomes of, like, we're trying to increase a sense of belonging. We're trying to improve their life skills. And so they were gathering a lot more data to understand both impact and implementation. And that benefited them because they've expanded tremendously in that since that time. I'm still in touch with Brandy. She's thankfully still the executive director because she is quite amazing. But she said it completely changed their culture and how they think about data. So they don't need me at all. Like, I haven't worked with them for years because now they have that system in place. They are able to, like, if they're going to expand and do a new program, they immediately look at what kinds of data collection processes do we need to put in place. So we're gathering data on a regular basis to understand if we're hitting the mark. So
I love that. Yeah, that's a really concrete example of, this component of the tapestry being this artifact, this rubric that you wove into the tapestry that is their organizational culture and making it an embedded aspect of their processes, their programs, and how just a small thing such as that helps them to start thinking evaluatively and inform their programmatic decisions.
Mhm.
When I was reading your chapter on building evaluation cultures, I couldn't help but think, as well as this other, experiences I'd had where, artifacts or aspects of culture contribute to this. And if I want to read a section from your book and then give a little anecdote and then pose a question if that's
Please, yeah.
appropriate. In your opening chapter of that, or opening paragraph of that chapter, you said, how your staff feels and thinks about evaluation will dictate their attitudes and behavior toward it. So this really resonated with me because in 2014, I was serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco, and I was the chair of the M&E working group. And we had this agency-wide across all Peace Corps globally, this instrument called the Volunteer Report Form. It's this artifact that's part of their organizational evaluation culture that's intended to be a 6-month check-in. And one volunteer, I remember distinctly, one volunteer expressed their feelings, which was widely held, about this volunteer report form, which was shortened for VRF. And they said, VRF my life. And that really just captured how this volunteer and many others viewed this artifact is really compliance driven, and they didn't see the benefit of thinking evaluatively, taking that moment to pause and reflect and be intentional about the design, monitoring, and evaluation. Because of it, it led to a lot of issues around post hoc justification for activities just that were happening anyway, willy-nilly, recall bias, data quality issues. And this was just one everyday indicator of like a compliance, old school mentality. You call it in your chapter, comparing between the old school and new school mentality. And so my question for you is, how can organizations repair and recover, not from not having evaluation culture, but from having what you call this kind of old school culture of compliance when it comes to evaluation?
I think I love that story, by the way. And I think that's also a very common occurrence in terms of how people feel when they're told, you have to do this, right? I think that one of the ways to address that is to include people in the development of that kind of a form, right? So for people to really talk about like what's going to be useful to them, what kinds of data do they need to make decisions with? So I found pretty early on by providing input or opportunities for input, and that created ownership. And if there's ownership, people are more likely to be engaged and actually use the tool in the way it was intended. And sometimes I think when we include the people that are the users of the form, they're actually gathering the data, you get important information of like, why are we asking this? Like, how is this being used? Or I would like to add asking these things as well. And because I think that, the people that are actually implementing the program and gathering those data, they have incredibly valuable insights to share on what would be useful to gather in terms of, to help the evaluation process. So I think that the old school versus the new school, I mean, that's a lot of where that shift can happen, is just by bringing people into the process. The other thing is just flat out education of what a program evaluation is and what it isn't, right? That there's an opportunity to learn. And if there's an opportunity to learn, then how can we use the data in this form to learn? I'm working with a new organization. Well, they're not new, but they're new to me, an organization right now where they have a very robust data collection process, a mind-blowing amount of forms, all funder required, very much compliant, like what you described with this it was VRF, right? Is that you said before? And so in working with them, I'm like, but have you ever actually done staff meetings where you talk about any of the activity reports? So they did that for the first time. So it's like opening up a new world. So they're looking at data that they've been gathering because it's been required for years. But it's like, well, couldn't the data help you also in your job? You're gathering a lot of information. Talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it. Look for opportunities where it can actually support your work, streamline your work, take the guesswork out of like, what should I do today for program implementation? Rather than being reactive, it's grounded in data to provide direction on what to do next. I think the other thing too, and this is so common, I don't know how many people here in the room today get this call, but I do, of, hey, we need to do program evaluation because we have to demonstrate the impact we're making to our community. And I talk about that in the book, that it can be used for that. I'm like, well, then if that's the only reason you want data, you should probably hire a PR or marketing or communications consultant, because because evaluation is not a PR activity.
Yeah.
But if you want to learn, and we may find data that will demonstrate impact, but you will also probably find data to demonstrate challenges and where improvements are needed. So if you're willing to be vulnerable and learn and have that balance, then yeah, program evaluation is what you want to do. But I get that call, I still get that call. I know colleagues of mine get that call. It's not a marketing activity.
I love it, and I can fully agree with kind of making sure that that gets to this aspect you talk about of educating about evaluation, about the role, and about its function. As it seems as though part of this evaluation building or developing evaluation cultures is a lot of like informal education. What we think about, there's literature around evaluation capacity development, and thinking about process use, that the members of these nonprofits or organizations benefit just in the participation of evaluative activities or processes, and that they're enlightened, their concepts of what evaluation is or isn't, disabusing of value phobia and this concern that, oh no, my job's at risk or I'm at
Right.
risk or we're not gonna, our reputation, what have you. So that's perfect. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to pause and just remind our audience that, Shari asked, you don't know if, or she was saying in her last response that if anyone else had experienced this, but we really do want to hear from your experiences, given that evaluation cultures are a tapestry. We would love to weave in your insights and your lived experiences, evaluation practitioners, students, and scholars. So please feel free to send those comments, responses or questions in the chat. We'll continue to move on.
Sure.
Let's see. So in your book, speaking about like more of this kind of the dynamics or the mechanism of evaluation cultures, you provide like a visual map, right? And it's this quadrant of comparing the two concepts of collaboration and motivation, and on this, the quadrants of collaboration, motivation, high and low, or poor and high. Can you speak more about that map and how you've used it, or how others can use it, or how those concepts relate to building evaluation cultures?
You bet. So I felt like the map, that matrix, really helped to articulate those two key organizational factors that influence being able to build a culture of evaluation. So collaboration being one of them and motivation being the other. So we've talked a little bit about both, but let me get a little bit more explicit. When an organization is highly motivated, they have the buy-in, they value program evaluation, but as an organization, they don't have good collaborative structures in place, then that's a place that evaluation still might not be fully realized, or could be everything it could be, because, and that's the collaborative piece isn't true for just the evaluation, but just in general. They don't, when they disagree, they walk away. They just don't have good collaborative structures in place. So, because a good cornerstone of evaluation is having collaboration in place. So I think that's an important part. So I think when they're highly motivated, though, what happens is there tends to be lots of conversations. I've really seen this more in larger organizations that have multiple programs. So what happens is they're duplicating efforts because they're not collaborating, but each program is maybe doing their own evaluation process. You can see them literally, I don't know if I'm out of frame, but literally, they're in silo, right? They're in silo and then, working alongside and doing their own evaluation work. So they're motivated, but they're not collaborating. And if they were collaborating, there could be an opportunity to reduce a duplication of efforts, so that maybe they have one survey or one series of focus groups, or they are all using the same rubric or something along those lines. I mean, those are examples of where they could be collaborating, but they're not. So it's something to move towards being highly collaborative and highly motivated. I think both would be important. Places where you have low motivation but high collaboration is that people are willing to jump in and do it. But if you're not motivated, if you come from that mindset of we're doing this because the funders are making us do it, you get generally, this is what I see when I come in, folded arms, like, yeah, I don't want to do it. But they're collaborative, but they're not, they have those structures in place, but they don't have the buy-in to do program evaluation. And in that case, I know I talk about in the book these 3 opportunities to help shift people in that motivation so that you have high collaboration, high motivation. That's the quadrant you ideally want to move organizations to. But these 3 steps, and I played with different ways, and I kind of was like, in the book, I'm like, what do I do? How do I shift people? And it's the 3 pieces. It's validating, educating, collaborating. I say collaborate a lot. But validating, that is a tool in personal and professional worlds, like across the board, validating. Anytime someone disagrees, right, Zach, someone says, I don't think what you're saying makes sense to me here, right? You might say, well, sure, I hear you. I understand your feelings around blah, blah, blah. So you're validating that you've heard me.
Disarming.
Right, exactly, right? So, and then educating. I understand you feel evaluation is expensive and time consuming, but really, I'm motivated to be your evaluation guide, and you are the content expert, and we're going to create a system that's realistic, that's going to help you in your job. Because too often in the past, I think people have either had experiences where it feels punitive, judgmental, or they're just not engaged in the process.
Right.
So I think that with that matrix, I mean, that's what it tries to summarize a lot of what I talk about in the chapter in terms of collaboration and motivation is kind of synthesized in that one matrix. And around collaboration, I'm wondering how many people have observed this particular situation in the room today. So early in my career, I would read everything to get a sense of a program, right? I would read grant proposals because that had strong language around outcomes. And then I would go to the executive director or program director. More times than not, they would laugh at me and they're like, you think we're implementing what's in the grant proposal? That's just to get the money. What we're actually implementing is this. And I was like, what? That makes no sense. Let's align these. Let's get these aligned. Let's make sure what's going into your grant proposals is in fact what's being implemented. So the data being gathered are the data that you can report on. Because there's this common pitfall that I talk about in the book. And I do it a lot in the trainings that I've done with nonprofit professionals to illustrate this point of how important collaboration is. So Zach, why don't we do a little evaluation theater? You want to join me on page, let's find the page. There's a little cartoon in here on page 32, and it's an email conversation in between the grant writer Anna and the program director Jonathan.
Yeah, so, yep, I remember this.
Yeah, you with me? A little evaluation here. Okay, so I'll start. So great news. We were awarded $350,000 to expand our Arts to Start program in the schools. It's a 2-year contract. Please review the attached approved proposal for details. Let me know if you have any questions. Anna.
Anna, wow, exclamation. This is so great. The team is thrilled. Thanks so much. We'll get started on that expansion right away. You are a rock star. Jonathan, program director.
And the narrator, 1 year and 50 weeks later, okay, fast forward almost 2 years, right? Jonathan, the funder report is due in 2 weeks. Can you please email me the data outlined in the proposal? Thanks, Anna.
Oh no. Anna, I am so sorry. I totally missed reading that section of the evaluation of the proposal. I don't have any data. What should we do? My apologies again, Jonathan.
Then there's a clock that says 2 a.m. And this is based on true stories, you guys. This is based on true stories from clients saying they were writing reports at 2 a.m. Jonathan, I'm not sure we have enough data to report to the funder. Anna.
Anna, I'll keep looking. I'm sure I can find something. Again, so sorry.
Okay, thank you. Ooh, good evaluation, Peter. So I put that in the book and I use that a lot in my trainings because it brings the elephant into the room where a lot of people that tell me they've been through this hang their head in shame and they think they're the only ones. When I share it out, it's like a real world, real life example that can easily be avoided. For one, don't ever email the proposal if you're expecting data to be gathered, right? It should be a conversation, but ideally they should be developing those outcomes together or whatever content is going to go into the proposal. And that's where the collaboration is key, right? That is that third piece in terms of building a culture of evaluation. I think it's a pretty easy fix, right? People have that conversation together. It's never an email conversation. It's either a video, in person, whatever it is, but a conversation. Because oftentimes what grant writers want to put into the proposal to secure funds may be different from what the actual program director feels is realistic to put in. Here's an example. I worked with an organization, Informal. They have a STEM Connect program. When I started this process with them, the development director really wanted to always put in that the program improved math and science grades for the 4th and 5th grade students it served. The program director was like, well, I'm not sure about that because we only go into the classroom 3 to 4 times in the spring. So think about that. They only go into the classroom 3 to 4 times in the spring, and there's an expectation grades in math and science will improve, right? Like a very limited time. So we talked about it a lot more, and really what we discovered is the development director needed compelling outcomes to put into the grant proposal. So we shifted to it being more about improving their attitude towards STEM-related subjects and increasing their interest in STEM-related careers. That's something then the development director felt they could put into those grant proposals. The program director felt like that was more in alignment with what the program actually does. So they gathered data, then there were data to report out to the funder, everybody was happy. So that was an example, right, of how collaboration works. It doesn't mean it's going to be this instantaneous, everyone's in agreement. It can be some hard conversations, and there were some circular up and down all over the place conversations to get there, but we got there. And so that is where having the collaboration helps to avoid things like 2 a.m. writing, or like this lack of alignment between what's going into grant proposals and what's actually happening. Oh.
Sorry, I love those concrete examples of how you know, we can make small pivots and shift in our way, particularly around this alignment question, and the how is one key component of that being collaborative, and thinking about how you have this ongoing conversation and like weaving this in to those structures. I kind of along with this, because this was following on the heels of that map, that diagnostic map about motivation, collaboration being kind of that other component that you have. I actually want to start folding in some questions from the audience here. So we have one from Dr. Harner, who's the interim director at the Interdisciplinary PhD Evaluation Program here. He asks, Chari, do you use any shareable or standard tools to gauge readiness of org, such as Preschool and Taurus's readiness for org learning and eval? And I see your map as at least an informal, kind of really accessible diagnostic tool that is similar, or would fit into this kind of role tool, which is like really like an evaluability assessment, like an organizational evaluability assessment. Do you have any other either examples from your book or from your work, or either more formal instruments that you use for gauging readiness for evaluation cultures?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I do have an evaluation readiness assessment that's on my website. It's on the resources page, but I also do use it when I meet with an organization to kind of get a sense of where they think they are. Do they have articulated outcomes? Do they have, you know, what do they have all the way through the evaluation process? So that's what I typically use. But in terms of standardized formal tools, I think that's a great question. I have the process I use is in that document analysis is where I start to assess, do they have outcomes that we can build on? Do the staff say that those outcomes are they saying the same things in terms of outcomes as what's written? So I guess that's my assessment, is really looking at what's written. So we're doing a document analysis and a survey with staff. What are they saying? And seeing if those are in alignment.
Great. Love it. I want to take this question from Elizabeth and kind of continue on to get at some of the content from your chapter. I think their question speaks to this more fully, but I'm just going to read this question from Elizabeth and then maybe make a connection from your chapter and see if you want to go in a direction you want. So Elizabeth says, would really love to hear your thoughts on helping people understand the capacity required for evaluation. My organization developed an M&E system, but didn't think ahead to the capacity required to implement and use it. I'm frequently asked to just do a quick impact report, and I'm struggling to help people understand the level of work required to go into such an effort, including the need to have all program staff collaborate. For me, this, it hits too close to home, and I'm thinking about at least one of the pitfalls. I think you mentioned 3 pitfalls in your chapter, but this seems to touch on one of those. I'm wondering, what you would say to Elizabeth here and how that might relate to what you've outlined in your chapter on cultures.
Yeah, sure. So Elizabeth, quick impact report. I don't know what it's like in your organization, but I would encourage you to potentially ask them to say, like, there's no such thing as a quick impact report. That doesn't exist. So the capacity required to implement and do program evaluation, I think, is a really important piece. And that is something that I often, will lay out, like, even after I've worked with an organization, I say you're going to need to have someone dedicate their time to being at the helm of this process. Some part of somebody's FTE is going to have to be a part of it. But in terms of the capacity required to implement, is that the question there, Zach? It's like, what is the capacity, or how do you share it? Or how do you?
Exactly. Just thoughts on the capacity required, but I really feel like your two of your three pitfalls. One is about unrealistic ideas about data collection.
Yes.
And then the other one is the no time or skills for data collection, right? You
Right.
talked a lot about the isolation component and being collaborative, and Elizabeth mentions that, but I'm wondering, this really touches on those pitfalls there.
You bet it does. You bet it does. So I think then the key then in terms of capacity requirements is to really create a plan collaboratively. You could I say collaborative a lot, but Elizabeth, I think that the key here is to really create an evaluation plan together if that hasn't happened already, because then in that planning process, that's where you can avoid some of the common pitfalls, right? Because you want someone in that project manager kind of role who's going to oversee and make sure everything is implemented. They're not necessarily the ones to do it, but that's where you break down those processes. For example, when having the unrealistic ideas around how much data that they can collect, really common that someone comes to me and says, we did this survey, we were excited to do a survey, so we threw it together, we got like 500 responses, and now we've realized no one has the time or the skills to analyze the data. And in terms of capacity, that should happen in the planning phase, right? So if there's a conversation, let's do a survey. Okay, who's going to oversee survey administration? Who's going to analyze the data? Who's going to prepare the report? How are we going to share it out? What's our intentional communications plan to share the findings, right? So really thinking through all of those steps, and I do go through that in the book about the importance of project management in an evaluation process. That's where it becomes clear of how much time it takes and do we have the capacity. I've also worked with organizations that are so excited to get into it, and they're totally motivated to do it, but they want to do too much, like a small organization of like 3 people, and they want to do surveys, focus groups, set up a rubric, all of things. And I'm like, how are you going to do all of that? Who is going to do all of that? And I appreciate your enthusiasm. But one thing around capacity is still dream big, write it all down, but then get realistic and start small, be successful, and then expand. Because what happens is some people start way out here and then they fail and they end up with 500 surveys in a filing cabinet somewhere that no one has the time to analyze, and they feel defeated and they're like, evaluation's too hard, too time consuming, too expensive, I can't do it. So by starting really small and really being honest as a team of what your capacity is, be successful in whatever evaluation activities you take on, and then expand as capacity allows. But I think it's a conversation, again, here's that word, collaborative conversation around like, what do we truly have the capacity to do? And I think supervisors need to give permission to people to say, I don't have time to do that. Like, I know I don't have time to do that. There needs to be explicit permission, I think, because too oftentimes people feel like I have to do it because my boss told me, so I'm going to do it reluctantly, but I can't do it, or I don't have time, or they feel stressed, right? There needs to be an honest conversation and permission for people to say, no, I don't have time for that.
Yeah, I see Elizabeth unmuting. Go ahead. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? I really appreciate, you're describing my entire situation. So I appreciate it, but I'm just wondering if there are, like when I'm talking with leadership about expanding capacity and planning capacity out for, I appreciate the approach of starting small. We actually have a beautiful big M&E system that now we're struggling to implement because it's just me. And, and I'm trying to convince them of the different aspects of it in terms of IT people who need to collaborate on Salesforce and SurveyMonkey and all the other tools we use, right? And community engagement people, we do a lot of participatory evaluation stuff. So it takes time for people to do all this stuff. Is there any kind of industry standard for like what percentage of a budget of a project should you devote to evaluation? How can I like say that? They're numbers people. They want to know, how much is it going to cost? How many people do I need to hire? And I'm trying to figure out how to communicate this in a way that shows how to build capacity in the language that they speak.
I love that. So the standard that I usually refer to is 10 to 15% of a program's operating budget should be dedicated to program evaluation work. And that could be someone's internal FTE, that could be an external firm, or anywhere in between. But from what I hear you describing, and I really appreciate you're like, I need to talk in their language. Do you have bandwidth or capacity? You don't have to answer now, but one thing that comes to mind is for you to create a plan. Like, these are all the things that you want me to implement, and then show like what you have the bandwidth to implement of the things they've listed. So what I'm hearing you say is Salesforce and all these different components that need to happen, but you're one person. So the option is to either reduce the amount that you're personally doing around this, like look at that system and like, this is what you're going to focus on, or they hire more people or a coordinator, or you connect with a local university and work with students and interns to increase capacity on what can be done. Those are like, that would be like the decision, like in terms of talking their language, like, here's the decision we need to make, right? Either we hire more people to cover all the work that needs to be done for our evaluation process to be a success, or we reduce the scope of what we're trying to do in the evaluation. And then this is the part that I can accomplish. So I think do some brainstorming and soul searching of like, of what they expect of you, what is realistic for you to do, and present that. Those are my 2 cents. I hope that's helpful.
Super helpful. Sorry. Thanks, Elizabeth, for unmuting and asking the follow-up question. I open it up to anyone else who feels like they're more comfortable to raise their hand and they want to pose a question. We have another question, but before I get to that, I do just want to pause and respond to a request from Lenore, who was asking about closed captioning. We've enabled it, but I think that we're not able to actually have it apply to this session. So what we'll do is 2 things. One, in the recording, we'll make sure that it's closed captioning when we post to YouTube. And 2, if there are any, I invite you and John to reach out to Lenore in the chat if there's any aspect of accommodations that we can do on the fly as we're kind of in this discussion. So thank you for bringing this to our attention, and that we weren't meeting that need and creating that space as inclusive as we could be. That's something we're always striving to do. So thank you for that. Just wanted to follow up for Lenore, who asked. Chari, Emma is asking about, this other aspect of evaluation culture, which, is this component of requirements around, or expectations around data collection and capacity. But when folks are just kind of fatigued, maybe they've been operating in an old school compliance culture and it's wore them down. And we come in with maybe an attempt to start small with a new paradigm, but some of those artifacts or functions or exercises still harken or similar name, like a survey, to that older mentality, and they're kind of on their heels. And that's kind of my summarization of Emma's comment and question here. I'll let you kind of refer to that in the chat if you like, or Emma to unmute. But, what do we do for folks who are already kind of frustrated that either participants won't actually respond, or that we don't have like that motivation, that component, right, in that map to actually do this thing?
So are you referring to the staff or so when you said participants, I'm more wondering, MF, are you referring to the survey participants? So that's the issue, or is it the staff that's the issue, or both?
So I, thank you, both of you, work on a project where we're the evaluator for the overall partnership, but we also work with each partner individually on conducting their own evaluation activities. And we do a lot of training, TA, and capacity building for them to be able to design and implement their own evaluation activities. And it kind of occurred to me, like, as an aspect of culture, that like people are just like, oh, we can't ask people for this information. Just kind of this like resistance to go and get the data. And I don't know if that's, part of like the nonprofit culture of like, being in the position to serve people and not wanting to ask for things back, or, just kind of, or they've had a bad experience. Maybe they're using an approach that really turns people off and people don't want to give them the information that they're looking for. And so trying to shift folks's kind of attitude towards asking their participants for data for evaluation purposes, and to be able to put an evaluator's hat on and get that participant's buy-in to participate in their evaluation activities.
Well, it sounds like, Emma, they don't want to put on the hat, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So I think change hats. So here's what you want to do is, here, this is my recommendation. This is what I would do in this situation is, if you haven't already, do some sort of survey to get an understanding of their attitudes and beliefs towards evaluation. Like, you want to understand like what's motivating or not motivating them, right? I mean, we can kind of guess, we can, you know, guess around what's probably going on here. We've already said a couple of things, but one of the things I do when I start working with an organization, I already refer to it as the staff survey. And it has 5 open-ended questions, and I don't share it with the client, and I get to know who they are. And the first 3 questions are related to the program. The second 2 questions gets at how they feel about evaluation. I don't know how far you are into this program, but if there's an opportunity to ask everybody to take a minute to complete a survey, and it's something like, what is your program goal? What activities do you do to achieve that goal? What do you expect to have change as a result of your program activities? Then that gives you a sense of, are they all on the same page regarding what's changed, or what they think will change, or what the activities are and what the goal is. The second 2 questions are, what are you hoping to learn in the data collection process or in the evaluation? And do you have any concerns about the evaluation itself that we should be aware of? When I get those responses to those questions, and I make it clear that this is a planning survey for me to understand what they think about the program and what they think about evaluation, and that none of their answers will be shared out, it's for me to understand them as an organization. So more often than not, I get folks that say, I've done this before, I think it'll be a waste of time. You know, then I know that person better. Sometimes if it's that strong, I will call that person and be like, tell me about that. Why do you think I really want this to be a positive and different experience for you. So tell me why you think it's going to be a waste of your time. And it's generally because, like what you said, a past bad experience, or they're too busy. They just don't understand that. It goes back to the value, right? Of validate, educate, collaborate, right? And it takes time. There's not an instantaneous aha when I have those individual conversations, but it's I'm willing to be here, and this is going to be different. I'm your evaluation guide. You're the content expert. We're going to work collaboratively on this. Because oftentimes I think people feel like it's not going to be realistic and it's not going to benefit them. So they truly feel like it's going to be a waste of time. But by hearing them, by getting their individual input, then you can start to look at like kind of the psychology behind like why are they showing up the way they are. So the bigger piece that you want to get them to as well is if they're feeling like we already do a lot, we don't want to ask our participants for the data. I've gotten that before as well. And my response is, well, don't you think they want you to be doing the best you possibly can for them? So if there's an opportunity in intake forms or registration forms or contracts or whatever they do when someone signs up to be a part of their program, I encourage my clients to include something like, we are a learning organization, and as such, you will periodically receive requests to complete data collection tools such as surveys, focus groups, and whatever that might be. Like, as a part of being in this program, you are agreeing to participate in these data collection activities. So that sets an expectation in the very beginning, before someone starts participating in the program, that they are going to be expected to do surveys, and it's not a waste of time. It is getting valuable insight to make sure that they are making the difference they intend to make. So if they show up with this, like, I want to learn and I want to make sure that the services I'm offering to you are the best they can possibly be. The only way I can do that is if we gather data from you. So it's showing up with a different mindset. So the first step is to get the staff on board with that mindset, and then that then rolls out to their participants. And I know we have a few minutes left. I want to just take a quick pause. I know John has some things he's going to, if you haven't already, John, if you could put that information in the chat. And And Emma, thanks for that great question. I'm really glad that you brought that up. But I am interested in knowing more about you and what your interests are. So there's a link to an interest form in the chat. I also have the book we've been talking about, and I know John has put that link in the chat. And I do have a workshop coming up on May 12th that is about logic and impact models. I will say it is targeted to nonprofit professionals, but that being said, if you're looking for a way to teach and learn how to do a logic model process with nonprofits, I invite you to sign up and check it out. That link is also in the chat. And I think, oh yeah, and in October, I don't think this is out yet, but October 13th, I am doing a coffee break webinar through AEA on this topic. Okay, that's all my stuff.
Great, that's perfect. This provides us a lot to kind of follow and continue the conversation. So, I mean, we have 10 minutes left.
Yep.
I want to, we've had great interaction and questions posted. So thanks for everyone who's done that. Yeah. Elizabeth had a follow-up kind of comment to, I think, this issue that we were talking about just most recently about integrating what you spoke to, that aspect and the programming. But I just want to pause and invite audience members to either raise their hand or think about what we've been discussing today, where we've gone, the concepts, the challenges that we've been wrestling with, and think about either a response, a comment, or a question to post in the chat or raise your hand. But before we do that, Chari, is there anything else about building evaluation cultures, either from your book or experiences or otherwise, you feel like you wanted to kind of speak to before we pivot to responding to specific questions for the balance of the time?
Yeah, you bet. I think the main aha that I want to share is to be open to connecting with those organizations that you're working with, because the way to build a culture of evaluation, I think, is being in tune with where their needs are, what they might be afraid of, what they've experienced in the past. So I think being open to that psychology, those interpersonal skills that I think we all need as evaluators to really build the trust, which then in fact helps to build that culture, and always, being willing to learn from those experiences on how to best help the people that we're trying to help.
Great. Perfect. Okay, who would like to, I would love to hear the questions, maybe from others who haven't had a chance to speak or to comment about that we have when making this applicable. Maybe you're not in a role like Chari as a consultant, or you might feel like you're not necessarily in the driver's seat with regards to decisions around cultures, but how does this relate to your work or your studies or your scholarship? How do some of the issues that we've surfaced through the conversation manifest in your practice or what you're seeing, and what questions remain with you? You can pause there. Okay, looks like Kasira has their hand up. Go ahead and unmute. Thanks for being willing to unmute yourself and pose your question or comment.
Yeah, oops, can you see me? Sorry, I had my little,
Yes.
I don't know. Okay, so yeah, this is really interesting. I used to be a consultant, and I recently switched to being an internal evaluator at a foundation. And one thing that I found to be super useful when, especially as a consultant, I literally just started my job 2 weeks ago, so can't really speak to working within a foundation, but was doing really stressing the fact that we're not trying to add work and looking at what is already existing and really underscoring the use of existing, like building off existing methods or tools or instruments, or adapting those, because I think that helps take some of that pressure off of trying to adapt something new or try to analyze, get new data and stuff like that. And the other thing I found to be super useful is, as a consultant, having conversations with folks and building a data inventory for them. So it's sort of like, we know you're doing a lot of work. Here's the way it kind of maps out. And I found that to be extremely helpful to get people back to a place of being more open, because evaluation and research has done so much harm historically. I mean, half of our instruments were validated on communities who were not actually serving in our work. So it makes a lot of sense that there's not trust. And then the other thing that we did, sorry, I just want to share some of these and things that we've done that have worked was in terms of gauging where people at are around with evaluation. When we started working with organizations, we would do like a creative way of trying to understand where folks are at. So when it was in person, we would have like magazines out or like cutouts, and they would cut out like images that resonate with how they feel about evaluation, or they can do Google image searches. And that was a really interesting way for people to share about how they feel about evaluation. You can also use like a scale that's anonymous, where people, you know, on Mural or Miro, whatever you're using, can put a little dot about, you know, how they're feeling, sort of like a Likert scale or something, Likert scale. But those are just some things we've done, and they were really effective.
Oh my goodness. I'm so happy you shared all of those fantastic tools. Thank you so much. They're great, and congrats on your new role.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I put in the chat there, but that I like that activity of the murals and putting, or the collages of, you know, as another way, like, you know, Chari, you talked about putting out a survey for getting a pulse for how people feel about this thing. And I love that creativity. I know, Chari, you're a musician, you bring art into your practice. You know, along with that, I'm wondering if you have any aspects of how, because when I think culture, I think about music, I think about experience, food, fun, dress, encounter, exchange. How do you make that evaluation culture building cultural and fun? And you talked about evaluation theater. Is there anything that you want to, kind of following Kasira's comment about this mural exercise, anything to that effect?
Right. I mean, I love that idea. I mean, I love writing music. So that's in my list of things to do one day, is write a nonprofit and evaluation musical. We'll see if that'll ever happen. but no, I'm kidding. But as an aside, I think one of the things in terms of bringing in the culture and the art is when people hear the term logic model, they either love it or hate it. And you know, when I've met with clients over the years, early in my career, when some people would like roll their eyes, I'm like, well, we should do a logic model. They're like, what? And I'm like, what is that reaction about? And so I changed the name to impact model. And I talk about that in the book. I still talk about logic models in the book, but impact models are essentially a variation of a logic model, right? And I customize the components to reflect what the organization wants to express. So more often than not, they are not interested in having something like inputs. You know, that's frequently dropped off in an impact model. But in terms of the art piece, the impact model is reflective of the organization's brand colors, shapes that will reflect what they do. For example, I worked with an architecture in the schools in the DC area organization, and their impact model is a building. And within the windows of the building details out the components of the model. So that's an example where really using the art, getting a little creative, so it visually appeals and reflects the organization's brand, as opposed to like the typical linear logic model. So I think both are important. I think the most important piece is having that process, that thinking process all the way through, and having the visual summary that everybody agrees to. But I think bringing that art into it, bringing the cultural piece, I think that's an important way to go.
Perfect, thanks. We do need to wrap up. I have one lingering question that likely we can't do justice to, and Chari, I don't feel like you need to respond to this, but I just want to put out there for others. Last week we had, or our last presentation, had the discussion around culturally responsive evaluation, culturally specific evaluation. And I know we've been talking about building evaluation culture. Kasira talked about validating instruments on populations that aren't representative of who we work with. But in closing, or as something for us to take home and to our rest of our workday or a week, and thinking about how does culturally responsive and equitable evaluation sensitizing principles or practices show up in how we work with organizations and participants in evaluation culture building. I'll leave that there, and you can either say, let's put a pin in that and continue, or you can have an initial response and a closing. And then I have one last announcement for
Sure.
our participants. Yep.
I would say to that, I think that's an excellent question. I think that sets up for like maybe a panel discussion with people that have done more in those particular fields than I personally have, because I think that's an incredibly important intersection and can have a very fruitful, productive conversations around where all of those intersect and how we can learn from that intersection. So beautiful question. Thank you.
Great. Well, that gets our gears turning, and we'll hopefully follow up on that. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. I want to thank Chari Smith for taking the time to spend with us to share your experience and expertise around building evaluation cultures. Everyone who had questions and comments and tuning in. I want to let y'all know that to register for next week's Eval Café, where we'll be joined by Minji Cho. She'll present on applying the AEA evaluator competencies to improve evaluation training programs. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you hopefully next week. Thanks, Chari.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Zach. Good to see you all.